those who are at risk of being involved in crime in many ways that reduce the likelihood of offending. Lighthouse is one of those initiatives intended to support this. Building strong communities encourages economic growth. This is why we have opened the new community home for adults with disabilities, invested in affordable housing, invested in women's centres and transition houses, and awarded grants to recreation facilities to ensure that Cape Bretoners have access to the services they need. Mr. Speaker, Cape Bretoners told us they needed to access cancer treatment without having to drive to Halifax, and we listened. Cape Bretoners now have the best possible cancer care with the official opening of an expansion of the Cape Breton Cancer Centre in the Cape Breton District Health Authority. Government is committed to providing better health care for families, and the official expansion of the state-of-the-art Cape Breton Cancer Centre will allow the people of Cape Breton to have access to quality care they need as they face one of life's toughest battles. The province invested $4.35 million in the expansion project through funds from the Government of Canada. The $8 million expansion will increase the Cancer Centre's capacity to provide radiation therapy and to allow more people to get more advanced treatment at home in Cape Breton. The commitment and generosity of people in the community has also been most outstanding. And by working with provincial, federal, and community partners, we're making a difference for patients and their families. The people of Cape Breton raised $4.7 million for this project. I am truly impressed and amazed by the generosity of the people of Cape Breton, and I want to congratulate them on their efforts. Mr. Speaker, the government is not simply concerned with the services that are accessible in Cape Breton, but also in ensuring the businesses have the infrastructure they need to succeed. In the spring, the government announced the construction of a new $6 million home at the Marconi campus for 5 programs, including a new combined metal fabrication welding program. The project is a reflection of the government's commitment to create good jobs and grow the economy, and is a good example of the innovative thinking on education our Premier outlined this week in his Job Here announcement. The new building will prepare graduates with advanced training needed for trades and technology sectors and will address the forecasted labour shortages in Nova Scotia. The building will also house the automotive service technician, motorcycle and power products, and heavy-duty truck and transportation program. We are taking steps to ensure that rail service continues in Cape Breton by extending its funding agreement with Rail America and creating a working group to look at its long-term future. The Cape Breton and Central Nova Scotia Railway will continue to operate until at least September 30th, 2011 under this agreement. This investment supports the business and jobs that count on the railway to receive materials and deliver products. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House is aware the dredging and deepening the Sydney Harbour will allow it to receive larger container vessels, giving the Port of Sydney a competitive advantage to receive more international business. A deeper harbour will provide the opportunity for Sydney to position itself as a world-class shipping depot. The Government of Nova Scotia remains firmly committed to investing the $15.2 million, and the Cape Breton Regional Municipality has agreed to provide $2 million for the dredging project because we realize that this is an economic priority for Cape Breton. In September of this year, the Government of Nova Scotia agreed to provide up to $300,000 to develop a detailed design for the Sydney Harbour dredging project. This is because we recognize that dredging the harbour presents a tremendous opportunity to create good jobs and grow the economy of Cape Breton. As you know, the timing for this project is critical, and this initial funding will ensure an early start to the design work. This is why we're really hoping for a funding commitment from the federal government. The Deputy Premier and I have worked under the leadership of our Premier to engage with our federal counterparts on several occasions, including a visit to Ottawa to meet with the Honourable Peter MacKay and the Honourable Keith Ashfield in June of this year, and was accompanied by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South, the Honourable Member for Cape Breton North, and the Mayor, Freudian slip on that one, the Mayor of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, the Honourable John Morgan, at that meeting that we attended. Most recently, Mr. Speaker, the news that the federal funding may be in question, the Deputy Premier sent a letter to the Minister Ashfield encouraging open dialogue and continue work towards this very important project. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to work to create the jobs that Cape Bretoners need and deserve. I sincerely hope that all of my Cape Breton colleagues in this House will continue to work together in the spirit of cooperation to make the best decision for Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, I was at a rally, Mr. Speaker, in early June of this year when many Cape Bretoners of all walks of life attended. Mr. Speaker, they came, and what I heard at that rally was that this was such an important project for Cape Breton that it actually galvanized the people. They've never been so committed and so united on one hope and one project that can move Cape Breton forward economically, Mr. Speaker. You know, the unemployment rate in Cape Breton has always been around the national average and is still quite high as we speak today, Mr. Speaker. And our young people and our young tradesmen are away working in Alberta, and our laborers are in Alberta. So by a commitment by our government to this funding of $15.2 million to help bring this along, to bring our young people back home where they can work at home, live with their families, sleep in their beds at night, Mr. Speaker. But what we need, Mr. Speaker, most importantly, is the colleagues in this legislature to work together to accomplish our goal of getting the Sydney Harbour dredged. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova for raising this issue today for debate and in late debate. And but I was listening to him very carefully, and he was waxing eloquent about just about everything but the harbour dredging for about 8 minutes of it, which is a good commercial to get in for the very, very closely scripted NDP propaganda. But I mean, he did get into the important area of the dredging of Sydney Harbour. And what he was talking about when he veered from the subject a little bit was about all the economic development that's taking place in Cape Breton, and I must be living somewhere else because you know, I haven't seen too much of that economic development going on in Cape Breton, the part of Cape Breton that I know. But you know what? When we talk about harbour dredging, and the member from Cape Breton Nova and the member from Cape Breton North and the other members that were interested in this project from all three political parties signed an agreement with municipal officials and federal officials, signed off on an agreement to go forward with this project some 2 or 3 years ago now. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, it's like the death of 1,000 cuts. You know, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and to the provincial government's credit, they jumped in before somebody else did. But there's one word there that bothers me, and it's the word contingent. You know, it's very easy to commit something if it's contingent upon somebody else coming to the table. And I congratulate the government for getting their foot in the door before anybody else did. And I would just hope, though, Mr. Speaker, that the word contingent would be taken out of there and the government would actually commit this money to the project, irregardless of who else is committing money to the project, that the provincial government, if they care deeply about this particular project, they would commit the money in any case. And I listened with great interest last week to the mayor's remarks regarding the letter he received from Chuck Strahl. You know, Chuck Strahl is not going to decide whether or not the federal government's going to be involved with the Sydney Harbour dredging. That's going to, I doubt, Mr. Speaker, Chuck Strahl even knows where Sydney Harbour is. You know, Chuck Strahl was given was sent a letter explaining the position of his department in funding harbours. That's all there was to that letter. And we've heard that before about funding of harbours throughout the country. And you know, like in fairness to Chuck Strahl, he's probably got a lot of things on his plate. And he was told by his bureaucrats, "We don't fund harbours. Send the mayor a letter and tell him that." And that's what he did. This matter is going to be decided at the federal level, probably in the PMO. And that will be done at an appropriate time, and I would hope that it's a positive announcement. We in Cape Breton are waiting, like I said, we're waiting all too long, you know, and this has been the history of my area, of waiting for these mega projects to come and waiting and waiting and waiting. And sometimes they come to fruition, sometimes they don't. And a couple come to mind when we were pushing a few years ago for the Sydney Steel Plant to be modernized. The Premier of the day went one step further than that. He said, "I'm not going to modernize the old plant, I'm going to build you a new one out in Cape Gabaroos." And that never happened. The government was defeated. The next government didn't see the wisdom in putting a new steel plant in Cape Gabaroos. But anyway, and then we're suddenly on the radar about being a world launching station for spaceships. You know, I mean, everybody got excited about that in Cape Breton. You know, that we were going to be the major launching pad for all. You know, I don't know where that went. You know, but I mean, we're subject, and I hope this is not another one of those incidents when it comes to the dredging of Sydney Harbour, because the member from Cape Breton Nova is absolutely right when he says it's very important to have that harbour dredged for the commercial activity that could take place in that harbour. And you know what? It must be very frustrating, Mr. Speaker, for Jim Wooder and the Marine Group and that, trying to go out there and get a book of business together with this great uncertainty. You know, how do you go to customers internationally and say, we're going to have a harbour that's going to suit your needs in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and then the obvious question would be, well, when is it going to be dredged? Well, we don't know. We're waiting for the funding. Should have been there last year, and it didn't come last year. So now we're still waiting. You know, I think there's a lot of patience in the area among the major players there. But I would have hoped, Mr. Speaker, that we collectively could have got together in a room and decided that this project is good for Cape Breton and come out of the room with all the commitments, instead of playing what some people refer to now as the political jockeying game that's going on, both for the funding and also for the credit of who puts the funding at the table. It's an important project for Cape Breton, and it's a project that I believe has to go ahead if we're ever going to do anything with continued promotion of the cruise ship business in Sydney, in and out of Sydney Harbour, and the post-Panamax vessels that could come in and out of there. We are strategically located to serve the world when it comes to that. We have a terrific facility in Point Edward, a lay-down area there. And we have as the member points out, we have a Donkin mine there that could be exporting coal out of the island instead of the situation now where we see the ships coming in there importing coal for the Nova Scotia Power to use. But I think that the tough negotiation that's been going on with Nova Scotia Power, with the municipality, everybody is of one mind in Cape Breton that this project has to go. This project is the panacea for development in the future for our area. And you know what? I believe that, although, you know, when you've been around as long as I have, you see these grand schemes come forward, and I had visions of that project being underway by now. You know, a couple of years ago, I said, well, you know, by the time the next session of this House goes, we'll have it signed off on it. And I know the member from Cape Breton North and the member from Cape Breton Nova and the federal members in that area and some of the other municipal officials all get in the same room and signed off on it, and with great fanfare and a room full of people down at the Fiddle. And I thought when we were going out of that room that day that it was a fait accompli, that this was because we all signed off on it. But then, you know, the political machinations come into play here between the three levels of government, and perhaps the mayor and his council were perhaps a little bit, I suppose, frustrated that things weren't moving along as quickly as they were. And I know that the provincial government came forward with their money, but again, Mr. Speaker, I remind the member from Cape Breton Nova that his funding from his government is contingent upon the federal government coming in. And I would have hoped that the provincial government said, here's our money, here's our commitment, put it in the bank, and it's there. No matter what happens, it's there. You can start the process with our money, and hopefully, if you can't get it from the federal government, maybe you'll get it from the private sector who want to do business in the Sydney area because they know that the project of dredging is underway. But that didn't happen. What the provincial government said was, we are going to put it there contingent upon the federal government coming to the table. In other words, I think there was a little bit of jamming going on there, that our money's here now, you guys come to the table. I don't know whether or not, Mr. Speaker, the Premier has been talking to the Prime Minister on this issue. I haven't heard that. I would have hoped that at his level, at the First Minister's level, and that they would have had this discussion. I'm not privy to whether or not they did, although I haven't heard the Premier say that he's been talking to the Prime Minister on it. Not so sure whether anybody in economic development is doing any studies along with the Marine Group right now to determine a book of business for the future. I'm not even sure of that. But what I am sure of is the people of our area want that project to proceed, and they're of like mind in saying that if this project goes ahead, I'm certain that the old adage, if you build it, they will come. And if in this case, if you dig the harbor, the business should be there and will be there in the future. But there has to be, Mr. Speaker, a united attempt by everybody in this area, no matter what political stripe they are. Everybody that's concerned with that dredging project should be getting together and of one like mind in this, and to get this project underway as soon as possible. It's dragging his feet far too long. And I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for particular points in time that these things are perhaps more appropriate than not to be announced. I think what we have to do is get the Premier talking to the Prime Minister, to get the Mayor talking to the Premier and the Prime Minister, and everybody getting behind the Marine Group, and to make sure this project is a reality. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to join in the debate here this evening at the Legislature with regards to the motion brought forward from the member for Cape Breton Nova with regards to the Sydney Harbour dredge. And to sort of build on the comments, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member, it's much better when he doesn't have the government notes and he goes, because he has a detailed knowledge of the community and could have foregone that because he's aware of the level and the detail that's there. And I guess part of his meandering into other topics is that things like the dredge hopefully mean the economic future, so therefore the social outcomes will improve in the region. And I'm sure that's what he wanted to emphasize, but at the same time, to recognize that as a society, things have to come to play. And I know there's discussions this evening around timing of announcements. And I know at the time some people were kind of cynical, saying that the provincial numbers coming in had something to do with a by-election in Glace Bay. I don't believe that to be the case. I went to that announcement, and I know people are saying that the timing may have something to do with federal politics. But I know when the province went forward to commit with contingencies the $15.2 million, I was in that room and I lauded my colleagues in the government because it was an important next step, and I do believe it's helped to clarify to the Government of Canada the importance and that the province has seen. And I suspect as well that people, and the member for Cape Breton South has talked about uncertainty and in some ways why the government only chose to put a one-year deal in place with the continuance of rail is to see if this really is going to come to pass. Is there really going to be? Because there had been 5 years of agreement put in place yet there's only a 1-year continuance of that. And the member for Cape Breton South talked about the time that we as MLAs and the federal representatives sat down with the Port Master Plan and signed off on that. And we did it as an all-party process. It was recommended when I was on the government side that we do it as all parties, because it was about making sure the community saw that we were working together and that partisan politics will be set aside for the interests with regards to the development of the Port of Sydney. And in fact, that's what we did. Further to that, and I know the member from Cape Breton Nova recognized recently the $300,000 that was extended to continue the work on the engineering and other preparatory work towards the dredge. That's been communicated to the Government of Canada. In advance of that, that's why post the Port Master Plan sign-off, that when we were in government, I was very proud and pleased on our mutual behalf to invest $2 million so that more technical work could be done so we could actually get to the process of a dredge tender going forward. And that worked both provincially. We worked with the Federal Agency of Enterprise Cape Breton Corporation. And one of the things that came forward is that when this proposal was coming through its processes in the community, it's one of the things that we in the region understood very well. And by the time it actually got through a tender process, I think it's important to recognize for the record that it did not make a federal budget round. It became an issue with other projects as a non-budgeted item. It was made very clear to us. So everyone went back to the task, recognizing that the Me Too factor around the country must be quite large. You start adding up $19 million requests by 308 constituencies, federal constituencies in this nation, that are probably some worthy projects. So everyone went back to the task of saying, come back. And as was indicated, we did the all-party process led by the Deputy Premier. We joined in that with the municipal leader. At the time, we met with the two members of Parliament. We met with the ministers, as was indicated by the member for Cape Breton Nova. At that meeting, they said, look at other alternatives. And we said, okay, where are there other pools of money? And I remember catching the eye of my colleague from Cape Breton Nova saying, well, you know, there's the tar ponds offset. There's money set aside there. This is the community. There's things that flowed to the harbour. And I know that he wants to see other things expended in the region that are maybe more land side. So then we went back to look at other things. And so the agency and the community came together to say, where is there a case that can be made? And that is when the honourable member from Cape Breton South talked about the confusion of literally a process being cleaned up, so the paperwork and the audit trail to close out an initial request for infrastructure, because that's where the request had flowed, and the thoughts that initially it was infrastructure, and then they thought it might fall under stimulus spending. Is there a way to capture that? Well, the answer came politically no, and that's when we had to set to the task of the meeting of all parties going to Ottawa. And then subsequent to that, it was an economic development initiative, and that's the case that's before the Government of Canada today. So what we do have is the provincial government with its commitment on the table. The fact that even through this process, and I would say to my honourable colleague for Cape Breton South, the Government of Canada has not said no because it has recognized the historic disappointments of an area that has gone through its more than its fair share of downturns versus upturns, that this is just as much about vision and hope for the future of the region, to be able to have an opportunity to capitalize on where the future markets will be as we go into a new era of transshipment and global business and trade. And that is something we've clearly understood. And what we're talking about as well with the dredge is how it complements and not competes with the Port of Halifax or the Superport, the Strait region, where what is relevant, what works. And we also know that dredging Sydney Harbour, aside from any potential shipping and post-Panamax, we know a complementary relationship with the Port of Halifax is with cruise ship traffic that has seen a trend moving where we're now seeing tens of thousands, in fact, over 80,000 visitors. And the fact that Sydney has increased capacity helps Halifax because you have to have sites. And those larger ships, there's ships that come in right now and have to use launches. The member for Cape Breton West has talked about the issue of the coal boats and the Donkin mine, and the fact that we have boats coming in half loaded rather than fully utilizing their capacity, thus impacting the ratepayers. So all of those things are known. And I do know, subsequent to that, I have had the opportunity to meet directly with the Prime Minister, and when those opportunities are afforded them, you take them. And to the Prime Minister, I put forward that case. We didn't talk about who was not in the tent. We complimented people for stepping up. But more importantly, my opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister was to clarify that this is the single largest priority. It is the only opportunity that we've seen come forward where there is widespread, not just across political lines, municipal, provincial, federal. It has captured the imagination and the belief of the citizens of Cape Breton, within Cape Breton County and the CBRM, to say this is where we need to move forward. So I do believe, as we've moved forward, as the Government of Canada has addressed this, those are the things that have been articulated. And there's been some suggestion that this is about political posturing and who's going to ride in on the white horse and take credit. Well, the reality is, quite frankly, even from a political process, and I know the member from Cape Breton South has been involved, I think, 11 straight elections where he's won, 33 years in politics. He also knows when a project gets funded, you're on to the next project. You're not standing around patting yourself in the back and pounding your chest about the great I am. It's about what else are we going to do? Because a member from Cape Breton South and Nova knows in politics you're only as good as your last yes. And really, what does the dredge mean for the future? And what is coming next? And that will be the political debate, and should be the political debate that will come forward as to who is most capable and positioned to advance what the dredge represents. Because the dredge is an enabling activity. It's who can work with the stakeholders in the private sector, who can leverage public dollars for infrastructure as government as an enabler and a facilitator. Those are the discussions we're going to move forward on. The Prime Minister has committed to visiting Cape Breton. Now, I know the Prime Minister has not, both as outside of politics and inside politics, been to Cape Breton. But when I also met with him, he had a very intricate and detailed knowledge of the area, reference, and we discussed the dredge, and he was able to put it in context with other things. And he was able to speak about some of the other aspects that have affected our area in a negative light and how we move forward. And those are the types of things that I'm assuming, Mr. Speaker, that when the Prime Minister comes, he will address. And it's for the Prime Minister, not for me. It's for the Prime Minister to speak upon for the case before him. And I agree with the member from Cape Breton South. The fact that has been brought to his attention, it's something that he will deal with his ministers. I feel confident that all of the necessary information has gone forward. I do know, and I do thank the government, both the Deputy Premier, for communicating to the Government of Canada. I do know the lines of communication still flow open. I do know, and I expect, I remain confident, to the member from Cape Breton South's concerns about is this another, red herring that comes up in a mega project, that we don't have to be as lofty about what's going to be a trajectory to the moon in terms of space travel. We want to deal with shipping, which we have a strategic natural advantage in the Port of Sydney, a long heritage of being involved with that, and something that will build on that. Because Cape Bretoners know that when the world needed Cape Breton during the World Wars, our port was strategic, our port was integral, our location was everything, and we know that to our future, Mr. Speaker. So what I would say is that, as John Ham said, do I think the resolve, I know former Premier Ham said soon, very soon, the Prime Minister's coming soon, very soon, and I hope he will bring with him the good news that we'll all laud, and we'll leave it him to come in on a white horse.
Order, please. That ends the debate on the motion by the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova. We will now rise and meet again tomorrow at 2 o'clock till 8 o'clock. We are now adjourned.